Hi everyone, welcome back to the Geterbrewed channel. Today we're very privileged to be at Harvey's, the best of Sussex. So Miles Jenner is the head brewer and managing director here. He has a wealth of brewing experience. He's an exceptional man to spend some time with. So I think you're really going to enjoy this one. Come on in and check it out.
The company started as wine and spirit merchants, and they came down from the City of London, and they didn't go into brewing until the beginning of the 19th century, and they went into partnership with another brewer across the road, a brewery called the Brewery, and that was sold up in 1838, and then this site which we're on now became available, and it linked the shop that they had, their wine and spirit premises, to the river and the barge transport and everything else that went on, and they decided to set up their own brewery. And they basically utilised old granaries that were on the site and converted them. But then by the 1880s really everything was getting worn out and they had to rebuild, and they employed William Bradford of Regent Street, London, to design and commission a new brewery for this site, and it's the one we see before us today. And it's a lovely example of a Victorian country brewery in the industrial Gothic style. We have all these grist cases cleaned. They get tremendous amount of webbing over the year. There you are, that's the crush for Monday. The downs that you can see to the north of the brewery are really the catchment area for the rainfall that goes down to our aquifer, 30 years going down through the chalk and clay. And then we pump up from there to our reservoir, down to the hot liquor tanks, boil to reduce carbonates. We do Burtonize, but it seems very wasteful boiling water in this day and age when you can do acid treatment. To us it is very traditional, and because we're using our water to cool the worts, we actually bring the liquor back up to the hot liquor tanks at about 140, 150, so most of the heating is actually done as a byproduct of the cooling process. So to that extent it's quite environmentally friendly. Day before brewing we crush the malt, and that sits in the grist case, the white structure above the mash tun. And then on the day of brewing, we have our hot liquor tank above, our grist adjacent to it, and we start up the brewing process by opening the valve that will feed water, or liquor as we call it, down into this drum here. We start up our Steele's masher, and we open up this valve, and the grist comes down, meets the liquor, and is mashed by a series of steel spikes into a porridge and hurled out into the mash tun. And you create basically one enormous bowl of porridge in which the enzymes are activated at the right temperature to convert the starch to sugar, which we will run off and ferment to produce our beer. 15-quarter mash tun, and it's mild steel with a copper dome on it, and the plates on the bottom are gunmetal. And this one is a 20-quarter mash tun, as you can see, totally stainless steel, but again we have gunmetal plates in the bottom. We think it's quite important to have a mixed metal system in brewing. There was an enormous copper vertical fridge there with coils that you literally ran the wort over the outside of the coils, and you absorbed air from the atmosphere. And we went on to paraflows, I think within a couple of years. which again, big change, because it looked quite dramatic when you saw worts flowing over. So we run from the mash tun, the worts pass through our wort safe to the coppers, where we boil for an hour and a quarter, and our hops are added at different stages of the boil. And although this copper here looks really archaic by comparison with that one over there, that was actually purchased second-hand in 1976, and I had this made in 1999, and it was made in Scotland at Rothes, up near Inverness, by Forsyths, who are very good coppersmiths. Obviously a lot of distillery work going on up in Scotland. But it replaced the original Victorian copper. Yeah. And we kept the diameter the same because we worked out that when we took off the roof to get the old one out and the new one in, we would have 1 inch leeway either side, so there wasn't much scope for any increased volume. Instead, we increased the height of the copper, and the fountain within the copper we did in sections, flange sections, so that we could brew different lengths of beer in it. We could literally reduce the fountain size down if we needed to. And we can still brew anything from 260 to 25 barrels of beer accordingly. Steam engine went in 1880 and really fired the brewery until the early 1960s. And I think a lot of brewers would have taken it out and put something far more useful in, but it's a very old friend, and we've left it very much as a piece of industrial archaeology.
Do you still fire it up?
We fire it up on Christmas Eve when we're brewing early in the morning for a bit of fun. We fire it up, and the whole place shakes and steam in all directions. It's a bit like being at a Dickensian brewhouse. So once a year we have that experience, and yeah, all good.
So we do density, alcohol, colour.
Yeah.
Beforehand to do alcohol, we did a distillation, which was occasionally a bit hit and miss.
Yeah.
And we've also invested to do CO2 dissolved oxygen. Yeah, and there's a little, I don't know, micro nano brewery, whatever you want to call it, we're bringing into operation to trial a few things.
Well, we're in the hop room at Harveys, and you can see in the bays the current hops that we're using for brewing, and they are all local hops, 40% from Sussex, 40% from Kent, and 20% from Surrey, and that's by and large the volume of our beers that we sell in our native and adjoining counties, and they are traditional varieties of hops: Goldings, Fuggles, Progress, Bramling Cross, and they are very much aroma hops, and we use a lot of them because we are on a traditional hop-back system, so we need to get a good bed of hops through which to clarify the worts that we've boiled. And you can see from the structure of the hop, the leaf of the hop, what a very fine filter bed that creates, a good organic filter bed. And you leave your trub behind, and your hops are then shoveled out and sent to local market gardens as fertiliser. So important for us. Lower alpha varieties, as I say, but lots of them, and aroma hops.
Miles, the hops bales are open, but you go through these exceptionally quickly, so there's only really a week's supply, and your bales are kept in cold storage before they're brought in here.
Shot, yes.
Yeah.
And you can see behind, we've got stuff waiting to come in.
Yeah.
So we hold in cold store for as long as we can, and bring them in so that they are fresh and ready to go. But they're not pelleted, they're not vacuum packed, they are simply as they were literally filled in the oast house and into cold store.
Something I've never experienced before, open top fermentation.
Have you not?
No. From my point of view, as soon as you walk in, you get a beautiful aroma. It's clearly the active fermenting yeast smell in the air. So
The worts that we've cooled run down into the fermenting vessels, and we pitch in our yeast. And after a lag phase, the yeast kicks in, and following morning, you've got a beautiful rocky head. And over the next 3 days, it will ferment between 3/4 and 4/5 of those sugars to alcohol, and we will be left with a product called beer. And the yeast multiplies 4 or 5-fold on top of the fermenting works, and we skim that off, put it into cold store, and keep it for the following week's brewing.
You see the krausen you can see around the top of this vessel here, for example.
Where the yeast head rose up.
So that's where it goes up to.
And it's skimmed on a parachute system. When you see the funnel-like structure in the vessel there, you lower that down to the level of your fermenting wort, and the yeast head above just goes down the funnel into wagons below. Wow. And then you put it into cold store.
And do you manage it by turning this wheel?
Turn it round, yeah, indeed. Why do I keep
Why
open
not
top?
Open top? That's maybe what you're going to say.
Well, it's very traditional, and I do believe firmly that if we were to move to conical fermenters, which we could do, the character of the beer would change to some degree. And when you've got a beer that is 85% of your production and people rely on it being authentic, and as it has been brewed for a number of decades, if not centuries, then it seems very silly to change anything that might impair that popularity of the brand. You're open to atmosphere, so you have a risk of wild yeast and other things, obviously, in the atmosphere. But the important thing is that you have a wort that you know is sterile, and you're giving the yeast the nutrient that it wants. So you get an active fermentation, so it will compete very effectively with anything else that's around. And obviously we're pretty strict on analysis, and we do check things out every week on the brews. And the yeast head that you're left with there, which is traditionally known as a macaroni head, you can see why. It forms a crust over the top of the finished product, and it protects it from airborne infection, microorganisms, wild yeast, whatever. And that is a seal on the vessel while we're cooling.
Is there a time limit that maybe flocculation would totally drop out? Or
no, I mean we cool. You're going to get a certain amount of yeast dropping out during that cooling process, and I think that the harder you go in with cooling, the better. We monitor our yeast counts from week to week, and they're pretty consistent. And obviously, that is aligned to the fining action in the cask.
Yeah. And it's the same yeast strain you use for all beer styles?
Same yeast for all beers, because with open fermenters, much though I'd love to experiment with another yeast and do something different, we would run the risk of infecting our own strain with another strain, which we've guarded jealously for many decades. So I wouldn't want to do so if I can possibly avoid it.
Tell us a little bit about the history of Harvey's yeast. Where did it originate
Harvey's
from?
yeast. We originally acquired it in 1957 from John Smith's brewery in Tadcaster, and they sent it down by passenger train from York to Lewes, and it arrived midday the following morning, was pitched into the brew. And we were given strict instructions that it needed to be roused at a certain point. It was very flocculent, Yorkshire yeast, which we duly did. And it worked. We had to look for a yeast because the yeast that we had been using had been lost. It was actually supplied by a company called the British Pure Yeast Company. And they used various Burton brewers to supply local brewers who didn't have their own strain with an easily replenished supply of yeast each month. And when they shut, that supply dried up. We couldn't track it, so had to find another yeast. And John Smith's was one that other brewers had great success with. Over the years, it's mutated in Lewes. I mean, you've got over 60 years of pitching from one brew to the next, and what was originally a single strain yeast is now 2 strains, exactly the same DNA but slightly different characteristics to them. So we jealously guard it and monitor its progress over the years, but so far so good.
Does it need a lot of nutrition when it's being handled in that way?
No, I mean the nutrition should be in in the wort itself. You can use a proprietary yeast food that will give you trace elements that might be lacking in certain harvests and cause problems, but always say if yeast doesn't get what it likes, it sulks, and it's pretty true. It's
So when Miles opens the door, the aroma again is phenomenal. I mean, beautiful. So this is a week and a bit's worth of fresh yeast, so go in and check this out.
The beer has finished cooling in fermenter. We want to put it into cask, and we connect up to the bottom of the fermenting vessel and run the beer through to this buffer tank here. And there are 4 racking heads. The casks are put on the cradles beneath. We press the racking cock into the cask, clamp it down, beer flows in, displaced air flows out. And when you get a column of beer coming out, you know your cask is full. You knock off your racking cock, and we put in a shive. And then through that shive, there's a tiny insert where you press your finings gun and you inject the finings that will clarify that beer. Put in a tut to seal it, roll it off, and it goes to the warehouse. So very, very simple, providing you keep the plant clean.
Is the warehouse then temperature controlled to allow the secondary fermentation to take place?
In our depot, we will hold the beer at about 11 degrees C in cold store, and we'll keep it there for a week before it goes out to trade.
So there is an element of your live yeast still in the finished beer?
It would eventually come through on residual sugars within the beer itself, but the priming sugar enables it to do so more quickly, so you get a far better secondary fermentation occurring and far better condition to the beer. Last brewery in the country to use returnable bottles. We actually wash and refill our bottles. The front load and front discharge, so the bottles go in at the bottom, off on the next tier, we sight them, they go through residual liquid, metal detectors and what have we, and then through onto the dry block where we rinse, fill and crown the bottles. And then they go via a tunnel pasteurizer, which we can either use as a pasteurizer or as a moving table. And the beer comes back to the labourer. We're delivering within a very tight geographical radius, 2 pubs. And we collect the empties when we deliver the new beer.
Yes,
it's pubs with off licenses, with our shop. Returnable bottles are great if you're working within a tight geographical area, 60 kilometres, say. If you want to have a national brand note, very difficult to use returnable bottles.
Yeah.
And you're spending a lot of time sending vehicles up and down motorways, getting them back, and it's not worth it. But when you're just delivering and replacing on the back of the dray with the empties, it all makes perfect sense.
Do you give a financial incentive for the bottles being returned?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of brewers have come down and looked at it to see whether they could emulate the system. It's difficult because you have to go from scratch, and there are a few bottles which are sufficiently robust now to do returnable on. You know, it's so much geared to a one-trip system. So, it would need a lot of investment, I think, to actually do, but we've never gone away from it.
Wow, I mean, what an incredible experience. This is definitely one of those experiences that I'll never ever forget. Very, very grateful to Miles for his time today. He's basically given us a full day to show us around his beautiful brew house and share some of his knowledge. So we really hope you enjoyed this. Please check out Harveys if you're in the area, and we'll pop a link below where you can check out their website. And until next time, happy brewing.